Hey beautiful people, thank you again for joining me under the palm. If you're new here, my name is Deborah and I do videos on Bible, health, and home with a focus on eschatology. And today we're going to be talking about a prophecy that might help us have some insight into the timing of the Great Tribulation, the rapture of the church, and just biblical end times. So if that interests you, then let's get into the video. So what is the fig tree prophecy? The fig tree prophecy is based on Matthew 24, and I'm going to read that for you. It's basically a parable that talks about the final generation that's going to see the Great Tribulation and the coming of Jesus Christ and the pre-tribulation rapture. If you want to know about when the end times are going to start, let's talk about why this prophecy might give us an insight into that. So I'm going to read Matthew 24 for you. Matthew 24, 32 to 35. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. So let's break these verses down a bit. I have some notes. So it's talking about learning a lesson from a fig tree. It's talking about when its leaves are tender, when it's starting to blossom. In that same way, you will know that summer is near. This is coming after when the disciples were asking, like, when is the end times? You know, when is this all going to go down? So right prior to this verse, there's a long list of things that Jesus mentions are going to happen right before the final days. And he's saying, when you see these things, just know, like, he's going to be coming back. So basically what we're trying to find out is, when are all these big, horrible events going to happen that we read about in the Bible that bring about judgment on the earth prior to Jesus reigning and ruling on this earth. So right here it says, if you look at a fig tree and how it blossoms, that's the same way. When you see these signs, you're going to know that Jesus is about to come back. So I want to break this down a little bit more, because there are hidden clues and mysteries in here that can really help you to see, are we in those days? If you go a little further in the verses that I read, it said, truly this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words won't pass away. So what he's saying is, there's a generation. He said, truly this generation will certainly not pass away until the things that that he just spoke about, which all these devastating events, things will happen in this world. And he's saying these things will happen, and that generation that sees these things happen will not pass away. So there's two views. Who is this generation? When I was a young Christian, I thought, when I read that verse, I thought it was the disciples. He said, surely, he's talking to the disciples, surely this generation will not pass before you see all these things happen. And I would think to myself, but they all passed away. Those disciples are gone. That generation did pass away. I didn't understand what he was saying. So let me break it down a little better for you guys. So there's really two schools of thought on what generation will not pass away. And I'm going to go into the popular view, the general view of what it is first, and then the second viewpoint, the less popular, but could still be very true. So the popular view says that Jesus says that when people see the signs that he talks about, then the end is near. And that if you see these signs, if you're alive and see these signs, then you're that generation. Now, let me just read the signs real quick, and then you can, I'll go into a little more and you can figure out for yourself. So many false messiahs will come. There will be wars, rumors of wars. Nations will rise against each other. There will be famines, earthquakes around the world. Christians will face persecution and death. Many professed believers will turn away from the faith, betray each other. Many false prophets will deceive masses of people. Wickedness will increase. The love of most will go cold. I'm summarizing the verses so that we can just get through a little quicker. The gospel will be preached to the whole world. The abomination of desolation will stand in the holy place of the temple. So that generation, it doesn't mean everyone who lived in that generation, but some of that generation will see this happening. That is in the midst of the tribulation. It's in Daniel's 70th week. That's a whole nother thing. But basically, the Antichrist is going to stand in the temple and he's going to desecrate it. And this last generation will see this. Some of this last generation. obviously people will die. Not every single person will see everything, and I'll explain more. So there will be a time of great distress, unequaled in the history of the world. So when you see stuff like that, you're this last generation. There will be signs in the heavens affecting the sun, moon, and stars. The sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. That's in verse 30. So the popular view is, if you see these things, you are the last generation. Now, a lot of these things already have happened. Wars, rumors of wars, persecution of Christian, increase in like earthquakes and floods, wickedness increasing. So he said this 2,000 years ago. So how could it be that for 2,000 years, the last generation is all these people? Like, we've seen that. So are we the last generation? Well, the popular view is, if you see, like, say, for instance, the abomination of desolation, which is literally an antichrist sitting in a temple and basically desecrating it, you're the last generation. If you see heaven, if you see the heavens affecting the sun, moon, and stars, like things are falling. Now, we do see a lot of astronomical things happening, but it's going to be way worse, and it says it's the worst time ever in history. Now, what most people believe is, if you're alive and you see the worst time in history, the stars are falling and all that kind of stuff, you are the last generation, which I partially do agree. I do believe the last generation is obviously going to see these things. So I guess the way that the popular view looks at it is that don't try to worry about any sort of timing. Don't think about it. Just live your life. You know, share the gospel, which is great. Do works for Jesus Christ. Do all the things, but do not worry about prophecy, because unless you see the abomination, desolation, sitting in the temple, don't worry about it. Don't even worry about it. So that's not my view. So I do partially agree that yes, the last generation will see these devastating events, but I think we can know more. I think Jesus gives us more clues. So let me get into the second, less popular view, which is actually my view. So my view is that there are hidden clues beyond the obvious in that parable. So if you just think, well, hey, if you're living in the tribulation, you know you're the last generation. I mean, that's completely obvious, obviously. But there are hidden things that God hides things all the time. So in Proverbs 25:2, it says, "It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings to search out a matter." So what is that saying? It's saying it's God's glory to conceal things and for kings to search it out. So he likes to do this. He likes to hide things. And we know that Jesus talked in parables. Like, Jesus spoke in parables when he came to the earth. He said, "Those who have ears, let them hear." Even the disciples would be like, "Speak plainly. Like, why can't you speak plainly?" He doesn't want everybody to know everything. He wants kings to seek it out. And it says we will be kings and priests. Because of that, I think, well, is it so obvious that, hey, if I see stars falling from the sky, I'm the last generation? Why would he have to tell you that? I feel like that's extremely obvious. So this is why I hold to the second view. One part of this parable that stands out to me is that he said, look at the fig tree. Now, obviously, the obvious is that you look at a tree. He's saying when the leaves fall off, it's the same way. You'll see signs, you know it's the end. But those signs have been happening for 2,000 years. So we know it's the end because there's been wars and all that stuff for 2,000 years. So is that really a clue, or is that stating the obvious? I think it's both. So let's move into why I think the fig tree, why he mentions the fig tree specifically. Look at the fig tree. That's what he said. Look at the fig tree. And I'll get into even more of that. So Jesus often refers to the fig tree in parabolic form when communicating things about Israel, just like when he cursed the fig tree in Luke 13. So many times he compares Israel to a fig tree. Now, why does that matter? So let's read Hosea 9:10. I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first ripe in the fig tree at her first time. So again, there's another verse where, just like in Luke 13, he is saying Israel is like a fig tree. And I could produce more, I'm sure, if I did a little more research. So Israel is compared to a fig tree. He says, look at the fig tree. So again, we can just use the obvious, or we can be kings and seek it out a little closer. So the nation of Israel, like the fig tree, was barren, cursed, and replanted. So in the parable of the barren fig tree, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can read Luke 13. There was a parable, there was a fig tree that Jesus cursed. It became withered. The point is, symbolically, a tree represented Israel, withering, being barren, cursed, and then it replanted. And in 1948, Israel was replanted. If you don't know, Israel was not a nation and they were in captivity. And then in 1948, the United Nations allowed them to come back together and become a nation again. So they were barren, they were cursed, and replanted. just like in Luke 13, the actual fig tree he cursed. So there's a lot of proof that Israel is related to the fig tree. In addition, it actually says it in Hosea. So why is that important? It points to the season. Now it says, now learn the lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. So Israel became a nation in 1948, which would point to summer being near. He's saying the time, the end, not just when wars of rumors of wars, persecution, that's the beginning of the end. It's been the beginning of the end for 2,000 years. But when is it the end of the end? Well, it's when the fig tree is replanted, when its leaves come out, start to burst and bloom. And I don't know if you guys know, but Israel is one of the most prosperous tiny nations. I mean, they can fit, I believe, in the state of Texas. They're so tiny, yet they have tons of gold, resources, oil. It was a barren land when they bought it, and then it became completely prosperous. So this literally happened. See, guys, how you can use the obvious or you can dig a little deeper. So in Luke 21:29, it says, then he spoke to them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. This is when he in Luke is also speaking about the end times. He says, I want you to look at the fig tree and all the trees. So I'm going to pop a map on the screen just to show you the flags of all the countries surrounding Israel. These countries came back to life around the same time, 1948. You can look it up. The surrounding nations around Israel all became nations around the same time, 1948. So at the same time, the fig tree and all the trees, Jesus is very concerned about that area of the world, not just, not so, this is the apple of his eye, not so much he's so concerned about, the West or Europe or whatever. This is a very big concern to him. So those nations came back to life around the exact same time. So he says, look at the fig tree and all the trees. Then you're at the end of the end. So it all happened at once. And I would like to point out, if you look at the maps of all the countries, they are all the colors of the four horsemen. So Israel is the only blue and white country. And then you have green, you have red, you have white and black. These are the colors of the four horsemen, which are the horsemen of the apocalypse, all surrounding Israel. That's just a little side nugget for you. But let's get back to it. So back to Matthew 24, it says, truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have happened. So we want to figure out what is a generation. So first, I just want to go back and say that just in concluding about Israel, if we're to look at that fig tree and the trees around, we can give a time stamp of 1948. Israel became a nation. It was barren and replanted in 1948. The nations around it all came to life around 1948, some 1950, some 1947. You can look it up. The surrounding nations with flags of the four horsemen of the apocalypse all came to fruition around this time. So around 1948 to 1950, around that time is when he's saying, this is your clue. This is your secret clue. Now, this is just an interpretation, but it's a really good one. So what we have to figure out is what a generation, because he said the generation that sees this fig tree come back to life and all the trees, they're the last generation. That's a possibility. So this is that second, not as popular view. They're the last generation. So we have to figure out what is a generation. So the modern view is that a generation is 20 to 30 years. So I'll read this. Generally, a generation refers to all people born and living in the same time period, Generally, a generation is referred to all people born and living in the same time period, regarded collectively. It is also defined as the average period, generally considered to be about 20 to 30 years, during which children are born and grow up, become adults, and begin to have children. So it's not very long. A generation is just the time that you're growing up and having children. So it's not the time you fully live. It's a shorter period. So that's the modern view. Like, you hear Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Millennial, Gen Alpha. These things are made up. It's like a modern view of it, and they're short. Some of these generations, when you look at what's Gen Z, it's only like 10 years. So it doesn't seem very logical to me, because some of these generations that they've labeled are extremely short. So that's a generation. I'm not really supportive of that view. What is the biblical view, though, of a generation? So the Bible doesn't explain directly what a generation is, but it does give an indication that a generation is based on a lifespan of a human being from birth to death. That makes a lot of sense, because there's been generations that have been cursed. God will say this is a wicked generation. So pre-flood humans lived much longer than post-flood humans, obviously, but it has been calculated that overall the average lifespan is about 70 years. So if you look at pre-flood humans, they were living like 1,000 years, and if you do the overall average between what they lived later, like people would die at 40 years old and stuff, the average ended up being 70. This is some research I did. This fits with the actual lifespan of a modern human. And it also is supported by Psalms 90:10 that says, our days may come to 70 years or 80 if by strength it endures, yet the best of them are trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. So basically 70 years, but the end of the years, like 70 to 80, are trouble, which fits with the kind of viewpoint that I'm going to set up here. So it's basically, the biblical view is more about a generation is from your birth to death. That makes a lot more sense than it's just some random number we chose or just the time that you're having children or something like that. That's my opinion anyway. So why it matters what a generation is because Jesus said, you're learning a lesson from the fig tree, and if the fig tree represents Israel and that tree and all the surrounding trees came back to life around 1948, 1950, you have a kind of a beginning here of this last generation, and then you move on to how long a generation is. This generation will not last. So is it 20 years, 30 years, or is it, to me, what makes most sense, 70 to 80 years? So I'm not giving an exact timing or date. What I'm saying is this makes the most sense. And that kind of brings us to here, because Israel is, I believe, 75 years old. Sorry, I forgot to do the math, but basically we're in and around that time period. So now I want to talk about setting dates of the rapture and the tribulation and all these events, these end time events coming. Even if you don't believe in the rapture or whatever it is, the end times. Should we be even trying to figure out when is the generation, or should we just live our life and say, hey, I don't need to know about this. This is not for me to know. Or could it be that it's God's glory to hide a matter and for kings to seek it out? So in the late 1980s, Edgar Whisenant wrote a book called 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Happen in 1988. I might have pronounced his name wrong, but his name's Edgar. He based this on a generation being 40 years, and that 1988 was 40 years after the creation of the state of Israel. See, he's doing kind of like the same thing I'm talking about now. He's talking about a generation being 40 years because that's what the world says a generation is. But the Bible says it's about birth to death, which to me makes a lot more sense. So this guy said, hey, 1948, Israel became a nation. Look at all the trees. They're blooming. Count 40 years. That brings you to 1988. So Edgar predicted the rapture would occur in 1988, sometime between September 11th. Now, he was very specific, and September 13th, and he published two books about it. So obviously this did not happen. Now, because this did not happen, it's kind of the baby with the bathwater situation. All right, we're never talking about this again. This is over. Anyone who does this is setting dates. This is completely wrong. Now, that's not okay, because if you're a Christian and you've ever heard this before, like, I don't go to church because I've met a mean Christian, or a Christian has hurt me once and I'm not going to church. So they're giving up the creator of the world and God and all his presence. Not that they have to go into a church building, but they're giving up a relationship with God a lot of times because they've been hurt by a human, and that human made a mistake, and so therefore they're giving it all up. That's what I look at this as. It didn't work out for him, his prediction. I don't think he was looking at the right years. He may have been onto something. He really may have. And to be honest, even though it may have caused a lot of trouble, I don't know how he went about it. I don't know if he was telling people to sell their house, if he was causing a lot of problems, making people give him money. A lot of times there's money behind these things. Now, he said a very specific date, September of 1988. So again, I'm not talking about that at this point. I'm talking about, can we know the generation and the season? And so, like I said, I'm of the second viewpoint, which actually includes the first viewpoint, because the people alive will see those very last things, the abomination of the desolation. Those who are not taken in the rapture of the church, and I've explained that, that's my video 1. If you're not in that, you will see these things. So what I think, in my opinion, that the second viewpoint is correct, because I believe it is pointing at the fig tree, all the trees, just like Edgar was trying to say. I think it was a little off with the generation, because if you really do your research in the Bible, a generation is more like 70 or 80 years. So this can still be a thing. I don't have a specific date, but what I'm saying is, I don't think it's wrong, because I do believe that this parable of Matthew 24 and Luke 21 was meant to give you, yes, an obvious view. Obviously, if you're alive in the tribulation, you are knowing you're the last generation. I mean, everyone's dying, so you're definitely the last generation. I just think the obvious view is true, but I also think the hidden view is true as well. So let's get into the conclusion. There are two views, like I said, one obvious view and one interpretive view. I am not saying I have all the answers, but I just wanted to lay that out with research to show you why people believe we actually are the last generation, those living after 1948. So who would be that last generation of the second view? Anybody living after 1948 or in around that time. That would be the last generation. There are people alive that are still from that time period. Now that doesn't give us much time, because that would mean that the rapture and tribulation and all that stuff has to happen very soon. As I said, Israel is 75. Anyway, that's my view. I have a lot more things I can support with, but I wanted to keep this video short. And so the second view still links to the first view. I'm not saying it's wrong. If you see the abomination of desolation, just know you are that last generation. All right, so I'll give you 3 reasons just to sum it all up and recap why I hold to the interpretive view. Number 1 is because Jesus spoke in parables, in hidden messages, almost his whole ministry. And Proverbs 25:2 said that it's God's glory to hide matter. And when God came to earth in flesh in Jesus, he hid these matters. He talked in secretive ways so everybody didn't understand. This parable that I read to you saying, look at the tree, look at all the trees, and that's how you'll know the end will come. And he said, that particular generation will not pass. And I told you, wars, earthquakes, all these, they've increased, but they've happened for 2,000 years. No generation is 2,000 years. So there has to be a specific generation. And so I just don't think it's the obvious view, because Jesus never spoke obviously. So my second reason is the disciples were seeking answers at that time about the end times. And if you were alive in the tribulation, you didn't need to be told you're the last generation that will not pass away. It would be obvious. Yes, you are that last generation, but that a generation is much longer than 7 years. A generation is 70 or 80 years. So it gives you a lot of hope if you're living when you see the fig tree blossom and bloom, when you see Israel come back, when you see these nations surrounding the trees and the fig tree and all the trees. When you see that, it gives you a lot of hope. So that encompasses my third reason. So is just that the fig tree and all the trees. I showed you the flags surrounding Israel. You got to say it's amazing that that one little blue and white flag is in amongst all those flags that are colored as the 4 apocalypse horsemen. This is the apple of God's eye. This is where it's all going to go down. This is where the war of Armageddon is going to happen. This is where the temple will stand. This is where it's all going to go down. And when Jesus returns after 7 years, he's going to put his feet down on the Mount of Olives. It'll split in 2, and he will then reign for 1,000 years with these kings who have been seeking out these mysteries, these kings and priests. So there's a lot more to that I can get into, but I just wanted to share this with you, that this is a prophecy based on a parable. And I say that in that it is interpretive. Jesus didn't say there is a fig tree prophecy. He gave a parable, and people realized that it was talking about prophetic things, eschatology, future events, and then they interpreted these things. So again, I'm saying this just letting you know that it is based on interpretation. So I hope that blessed you and is interesting to you. So I hope you enjoyed this, and if you like it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks again for watching, and yeah, I will catch you in the next one. Bye.